Welcome to our Sunday podcast, The Debrief. We're going to be looking at some of the stories that have come up since the start of the weekend. And I am very happy to be joined by Lewis Aaron. How you doing, Lewis?
Hello, happy Sunday. I'm doing all right. Just so much news as usual coming out, and I just knocked something over in my room. So sorry if that was loud through the microphone.
It's all good. It's quite quiet at my end, and that's the main thing. As long as you didn't blow my eardrums out, it's fine. Yeah, so we're going to be discussing Sue Gray's departure, obviously, as Chief of Staff, and the introducing of Morgan McSweeny into that position. I think we should maybe focus on Morgan McSweeny over Sue Gray necessarily. I do want to also discuss Boris Johnson's suggestion in the Daily Telegraph that we should have a referendum on the European Convention / European Court of Human Rights. And any other stories that you'd like us to discuss. Me and Lewis have just agreed before the show that we just keep an eye on the chat and see if there's anything else you want us to discuss. But please do bear in mind that with regards to the situation in the Middle East, we are going to be discussing October 7th tomorrow because it will be the anniversary of October 7th during the show. So we'll try and avoid that as a topic, but we can talk about it a little bit if people want. So I think, first of all, we want to talk a little bit about the fact that Sue Gray has been replaced after an alleged battle. McSweeney's technically denying that him and Sue Gray ever failed to work together and has sort of argued that they've always got on very well. But we know from briefings from sources inside Parliament that the press have that I said inside Parliament, I meant inside 10 Downing Street, that the press have that those two did not get on very well. First of all, have you got any thoughts on the conflict between those two, Lewis?
Well, the thing is, right, we still don't know who was leaking information about Sue Gray, about her salary, about various other things that have been leaked out of 10 Downing Street. And I need to be very careful when I say this, because I am going to say, is it possible, allegedly, using all these safe legal words to say, could it have been Morgan McSweeny? Because we know that this person has been planning everything that's happened right now up until this point since around 2015. As somebody pointed out in the comments, I'm just going to quickly put this one up. This is what describes Morgan McSweeny, because this is who he is. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody did report at some point that they found out it was somebody either related to or working for Morgan McSweeny in terms of putting this feud out in the public, leaking information to eventually get rid of Sue Gray. Because if anybody knows about manufacturing outrage, it's Morgan McSweeny. We know that from everything that he did to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, to manufacturing the anti-Semitism row that eventually led to the downfall of Jeremy Corbyn. All of these things are connected to Morgan McSweeny. So, is Sue Gray completely innocent in all of this? People reported that, she was a bit of a control freak and that she was stopping the appointments of people. But we don't know how true that is, because I'm more inclined to believe that a lot of the information that we know about Sue Gray and to get rid of her and to get Morgan McSweeny into that position could have been manufactured to get him into that position. So who knows? Will we ever know? Maybe not.
It does seem that there's a lot of corruption generally surrounding Morgan McSweeny. Alleged corruption surrounding Morgan McSweeny.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Well, here's the thing. McSweeney's wife, who's Imogen, her last name's gone from my head. They don't share a last name. I remember that. It's I think
she just became an MP very recently. Yeah.
Yeah, she did. She was imposed as a candidate on a Labour safe seat, Hamilton and Clyde Valley, and was then pretty much appointed as Rachel Reeves' secretary. There's a term PPS, I think it's personal political secretary. I can't remember.
Imogen Walker. There we go. Sorry, I just checked.
Imogen Walker. That was it. Sorry, I couldn't remember the last name. But yes, the fact that she was imposed as a candidate and then just happened to be appointed as Rachel Reeves' secretary.
And a brand new MP, which is unusual.
Yeah. There's sort of there's a lot of nepotism. I think around the centre of power in Downing Street, which, as much as the Tories have told us that there's a big change from previous administrations, whether that's Johnson or Cameron, it's exactly the same style, right? It's that, you know, your friends happen to own a country that can be quickly turned into a PPE contract. It's not exactly the same, of course. I wouldn't say it's that level of corruption, but it's the same vein of corruption along the lines of, like, yeah, the nepotistic, the you guys are the in group type thing. Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the article, but Anushka Stana recently did release an article. Oh yeah, it's called "Corbyn Had Flown Too Close to the Sun: How Labour Insiders Battled the Left and Plotted the Party's Path Back to Power." She released that just around a month ago, and it literally lays out exactly how McSweeny has basically he rallied the right of the party, how he gathered billionaire and millionaire donors, which are also connected deeply also to the Israeli lobby, which helped fuel the anti-Semitism, manufactured anti-Semitism row under Jeremy Corbyn, which eventually got Keir Starmer into power and has eventually got him into this position. It's frustrating that, you know, there's always going to be unelected people, influencing politics behind the scenes. It's just how it is. But to this level, it's very frustrating that there is now a person who, arguably has one of the most powerful jobs in the country, has managed to wiggle his way there by all these maneuverings. It's frustrating. Why should somebody who is unelected have this much influence and this much power and be able to fly this close to the sun? But the article actually does reference Icarus and how Jeremy Corbyn was Icarus and he flew too close to the sun. So maybe McSweeny is now flying too close to the sun, because when you get into that position, you make a lot of enemies. So he's now going to have to deal with that, as opposed to being a bit more behind the scenes.
Yeah, I want to talk briefly about Morgan McSweeney's background. Some of where he came from, because I made a note of something because I thought it was really interesting. So he worked for Mandelson's essentially propaganda machine in 1997, and from 1997 to I think it was about 2006, might be 2008. My memory fails me right now, but he focused down on local politics. And very much helped Hope Not Hate. To his credit, this isn't a criticism of him. This is an analysis of his background. He was helping Hope Not Hate drive the BNP out of local politics from about 2006-7 to 2010. And the way that he did it, and I think this is the key bit, was by outflanking them on patriotism and crime. So he made the local MPs very like they emphasise reducing crime and their patriotic values, the Labour MPs, and that sort of formed the basis of his strategy going forward. And he founded Labour Together, the think tank that everybody knows as the Blairite think tank, in 2017, and that it was around that time that he created the 3-year plan to make Starmer or someone like him PM. And he helps Starmer then beat Rebecca Long Bailey in the leadership contest. I think it is worth bearing in mind that he also ran Liz Kendall's campaign in 2015. Right?
She came fourth.
Exactly. So I think it was a very, very small percentage of the vote she got. She came fourth in that competition. Where he was like putting forward the principles that he wanted to uphold to the Labour Party. The sort of like, we should do soft austerity, we should do austerity light. Show how hard we are by making sure that we show those people on benefits what for. And then, of course, in 2020, the operation changed. It became, well, how do we meet people where they're at? We just lie to the people. We just lie to the people we're trying to appeal to. And I think the term was he wanted to peel off the soft left from the party. But anyway, after that, he created this 3-year plan to make Starmer PM. And the 3-year plan included the detoxifying the party, which basically means removing the hard left, get it working in Parliament, and then outflanking the Tories on crime, defence, and the economy. Right, you can see the parallel between the way that he approached dealing with the BNP and the way he approached dealing with the Tories. The problems, I think, come when you start to try and apply that on a national scale for a longer period of time. Right, because in an election where the Tories, like, they're sort of like everyone from John Curtis to any political body you care to name, polling body you care to name, will tell you that the reason that Starmer won was the collapse of the Tories. It wasn't so much because he was absolutely brilliant, right? Or their political strategy was particularly brilliant. It was the collapse of the Tories that won Labour the most recent election. As such, of course, I do think that Morgan McSweeny has put himself in a situation where he thinks of himself as a political genius. A lot of the liberal political class, particularly the New Statesman, who I was reading earlier, think of him as just a absolute political genius. But actually, this is a series of favourable circumstances coming together that, will apply quite well on the local level. You can sort of mimic patriotism on the local level without having too much of an impact. When you try and do that on the national level, I think there's all sorts of fallout that we should be expecting. And the fact that Reform are polling, like, not overall polling better, but on the metrics that would be really important to the Tories, they tend to be polling better right now than the Conservative Party, in terms of, like, people's confidence in their economic plans, for example. And I think that's something that McSweeny needs to be wary of. So what are we sort of like thinking in terms of McSweeney's strategy and whether or not this is going to work going forward now that he's chief of staff?
Yeah, I also completely reject this idea from the New Statesman that he's a little political genius, right? So what did they finish on again? Remind me, is it 34? It's around 34% of the vote, right? The vote share. So Jeremy Corbyn, Morgan McSweeny was, he started his whole trajectory to where he is now because he was scared that the party was taken over by the hard left just after an election where Jeremy Corbyn won 40%. So if you take that trajectory from when Morgan Sweeney was first radicalized to get Labour back to the centre, he's taken them from 40% of the vote share down to 34-ish% of the vote share, and a big part of that is on him. If you look back at the Labour campaign, they could have still kept to that centrist point, right? If they would have been just a little bit more pro-Palestine and, just let go of this like $1 to $2 billion of the 2-child benefit cap, they wouldn't have seemed as bad to so many more people. And maybe they could have actually scored a decent victory. But I think it's very obvious right now that they have a very fragile majority. I don't care how, big it is under the first past the post system. It's ripe for absolute destruction at the next election, or God forbid, if another election is called again. I think the fact that Keir Starmer is already at, if I remember correctly, according to the latest polls, correct me if I'm wrong, Cog, he's already less popular than Rishi Sunak was at his lowest. That's Morgan McSweeny. He ran the election campaign. He's been behind the scenes, obviously causing a load of shit and a load of drama and a load of trouble, which has now resulted in Sue Gray being gone. And now finally, he's got the highest unelected job that he could possibly have in the country, which has gotten him the most power. And at what cost? Everybody hates Labour almost more than they hate the Conservatives, and they were just in power after 14 years of austerity, of culture wars, of everything that has happened in the last 14 years. And in the space of a few months, the Labour Party are now less popular than Conservatives. The Prime Minister is now less popular than Rishi Sunak. And Morgan McSweeney's got a job. He's the chief of staff. Well done. Look at all the damage you have caused. He's the person who's responsible for splitting the left in the party. He did everything that's led up to now. And I don't want to give him that much credit because there are other people involved in this as well. I don't want to make it seem like Morgan McSweeny is the only mastermind behind all of this. He's not. I don't want to give him all that credit. But that's the role that he has played. He has played a big role in where we are now. And it's all been at the cost of his own ideology, of what he thinks we should be doing, and he's unelected. It's disgusting. Do you think I'm going off? Am I going off too much? Am I giving him too much credit, Cog? I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I think also the problem is with the framework from which I think Morgan McSweeny understands the world. It's not an entirely like faultless framework, and it has its uses, and he's clearly a reasonably competent political strategist on the local level. I just think when you apply it to the national level, you're instantly going to run into some problems because, of course, like on the local level particularly, the central threats are the blues and the reds, right? And on the national level, you can kind of extrapolate and see how he's got to like, oh well, it's about the blue team and the red team. And his strategy for dealing with the Conservatives was to emphasize the economy, because it was Morgan McSweeny used to use use a Star Wars metaphor to describe it. It's the I've forgotten the name. The reactor core to the Death Star's reactor core. Do you know what I'm referencing? I'm a massive Star Wars nerd, and I don't know why I can't recall this now. It's essentially the weak point of the Death Star. It's the weak point of the Conservatives is the fact that they've got this reputation for being really good on the economy, or had this reputation for being really good on the economy, and they don't actually have anything to back that up, because it's been, especially since Liz Truss, just a continual calamity, just a continual economic calamity. And the fact that they are that weak was what Morgan and McSweeny like heavily emphasized to Keir Starmer, was like, okay, hit them on the economy every time you want to bring up how economically incompetent they are. And it's paid off in the polling. Like, the Conservatives are massively behind in terms of economic incompetence, behind Labour, behind Reform, behind the Lib Dems, behind the Greens. Like, they are massively behind. But of course, that framework of understanding is sort of like, well, the Conservatives can only win by being seen as they currently are, right? They can't do anything like shift to the right and form a coalition with Reform that might reshape their image, or indeed Reform might become a electoral threat by 2029. And I think that both Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeny have left us massively open to the rise of Reform, and the possibility that the hard right could become stronger throughout this, especially as they've been hitting on we need to get immigration down, and they're so easy to hit with the corruption baton. They're so obviously hypocritical. They'll hit the Tories for like their and they did hit the Tories for their corruption, but you've not only got Giftgate, you've also got the fact that Morgan McSweeny and Labour together were fined £730,000 by. They weren't fined £730,000.
That was the amount they failed to disclose.
They failed to disclose £730,000 of donations to Labour together, and we know who the people who it came from. These donations came from were, because they were the same people who they've been coming from before. So we know
it's the same guy who funds Biocom, who funds Friends of Israel. No, sorry, not Friends of Israel. We Believe in Israel, which is directed by Luke Akehurst, another person who is involved in the downfall of Jeremy Corbyn. It's frustrating that all this ties together in so many ways. Obviously, it's not just to do with like these specific lobbyists who want the world in the way that they are. There's so many other factors that go into this. But again, it's just, how can I say this? I'm fed up of people just being involved in our elections, in our policies, in our government, who are only looking out for their own interests. I feel like I'm going to mention it again, like Anush Kirstana's article. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because even though most of what's in there is old information about the people who maneuvered in the background to get Keir Starmer into power, to get Jeremy Corbyn out, all of this, but it brings it to now. It's like the extended version, right? Like Lord of the Rings has come out. Here's the extended version. Go watch a 5-hour episode of Lord of the Rings. It's like that, and it brings it all into reality. And you just realize like how even though we already know this, but you again get reminded that there are so many things outside of our vote and outside of the Labour Party membership, outside of the control of so many factors that are influencing things in the background. It just makes you want to scream inside. And these actions have led to, the split of the Labour left, which going back to your comment about leaving it open for reform, I would tie Morgan McSweeney's actions to that split of the left, which could potentially open up a pathway for reform into the future. So, in the pursuit of him getting his position of power, has potentially harmed the country in the future. Maybe that's just speculation. We'll see.
I think, I think we are speculating, but I think there's reason to believe that, particularly as we know in the decades after an economic crash, we know that there is a rise of the right. We know that pattern is happening around the world right now. We know that they're a threat that, like, that there's an element of like both sidesism to where the blame lies, in my opinion. Because I do think that it's very true that liberals will always side with the fascists, like Curtis and we were saying on a previous episode of the Debrief. However, I do think that there's a sort of that there's also an unwillingness for the left to work with liberals, or to like present them as more right wing than they actually are. It's a general tendency, of course, when it comes to Keir Starmer and when it comes to the current makeup of the Labour Party. I'm like, nope, they've made their bed. There's nothing you can do at that point. But I do think there's an obvious comparison with the Weimar Republic and the SPD, the Social Democrats, and the KPD, the Communist Party, like batting heads just before the election. And Morgan McSweeny in this way is comparable to the Social Democrats because, of course, he's representing the hard left as the big threat to democracy, when in a system that is set up to be right-wing, it's going to be a system that is in danger of falling off the right end of the spectrum. It's going to experience right-wing extremism far more often than it's going to experience left-wing extremism. I did have a quote from the New Statesman. Unfortunately, I didn't get an infographic for this, apologies. But I thought it was interesting. They said Labour's selection process for parliamentary candidates, which caused fierce rows within the trade union movement, was devised by McSweeny. Under the system, the party's HQ retained a tight grip on the crucial long listing stage, and to date, almost no one from the Corbynite left has made it past Starmer's Praetorian Guard. He doesn't have room for compromise with the hard left, says Forbes. He thinks they need to be eradicated from the party because they are so dangerous. It's that same thing of representing the far left as being the danger when there is a real, obvious and present danger of the far right rising, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in globally right now, right?
The thing is, though, like, because Morgan McSweeny didn't like, and by the way, I like Curtis, I absolutely reject the title of hard left for anyone who's like Jeremy Corbyn, Rebecca Long-Bailey. They're definitely like further on the left, further than centre left, obviously, but nowhere near hard left. I don't think in any way, personally. But the issue is that they've created a party which is completely undesirable to many people who are just classic leftists, right? I'm in Woodford, which was Faiza Shaheen, who was famously purged from the party in the same week that there was the Diane Abbott row as well. They got rid of multiple candidates now to a point where, you know, I went to one of Faiza Shaheen's rallies where we met people we met a woman who has been a member of the Labour Party since she was 14 and she was like 85, and she left because of the actions of these people behind the scenes who were quote unquote purging the left. And I also disagree with this idea of like the left being unable to make compromises with like the right of part of the party. Like, yeah, that can happen sometimes, but I feel like there's a difference between not making compromises on some stuff than creating an entire plan which completely purges the party of anybody left. The only person that is left in the party is obviously Diane Abbott, and that was due to very exceptional circumstances, which were discovered that they were trying to get rid of her behind the scenes, right? The investigation completed months and months before, and they were hanging on it in hopes that she would leave or retire or accept a peership in the House of Lords, which is quite funny because I think I did read it earlier that part of the plan to get rid of Sue Gray was offering her also a seat in the House of Lords too. Sounds quite familiar. I wonder who came up with that idea. There's a pattern, right? Those people that they try and purge, and they might not necessarily be able to purge, they use other incentives, which might appeal to more people on the right, as opposed to people who I think are a bit more principled on the left. We know that people who are in the left of the party might not necessarily be tempted by, being a lord in the House of Lords, right? And that's why Diane Abbott refused it. And other people have in the past too as well. Sorry, I'm going off on a different rant now. Go ahead.
No. I think you're absolutely right. I think that, especially when you look at who's funded Labour Together, and of course, it's Morgan McSweeney's birth child. So these are the people who ideologically follow the presets that Morgan McSweeny is bringing to the table. They are people like, I've got written down, the hedge fund manager, Martin Taylor, venture capitalist, Trevor Chin, and investment capitalist and former media mogul who once partly owned ITV, Baron Hollick. These are all people who are like, within the sort of like, their interests are really obvious. It's not subtle, right? These aren't people who are out for the public good. I did want to draw a comparison because I think it's a worthwhile comparison between Dominic Cummings and Morgan McSweeny. I think that both characters have been represented as political geniuses in some way by the liberal media, and they're both obviously special advisors. And with Dominic Cummings, there was a film on I think it was Channel 4, I can't exactly remember, but it was called The Uncivil War, and they had Benedict Cumberbatch. They literally got the guy who plays Sherlock to come on and play Dominic Cummings, right? They're obviously representing him as a genius, but looking back, we can kind of see how yes, Dominic Cummings was he had some strategic things correct, not denying that, but he was also met with very favorable circumstances for what he needed to deal with, right? He was met with favorable circumstances in terms of the political fallout of the financial crash. When there's political fallout like that, the far right does often rise, and you get what's called palingenetic nationalism, the idea of nationalism that's centered around a national rebirth, a rebirthing of the country, and a reshaping of it around usually around a mythic past. It's one of the kind of principles that Umberto Eco talks about when he talks about the 14 foundational ideas of fascism. But like, so you've got Dominic Cummings playing off that. McSweeny, in a similar way, is playing off of the downfall of the Tories, right? McSweeny didn't do anything to bring that about in terms of pulling the rug out from under the Tories. He helped build Starmer up and made him emphasize the correct things. But I think it's so easy to overblow the impact that he had. The same with the BNP and the rise and fall of the BNP in local politics. A lot of that is to do with the fact that Nigel Farage and UKIP and those other forces on the right of politics kind of made the BNP irrelevant. So at sort of every level, I can see how Morgan McSweeny and Dominic Cummings might, obviously it's already happened with Dominic Cummings, excuse me. With Dominic Cummings, we had the whole Barnard Castle debacle, and we saw how like...
I was testing out my eyes.
I was testing my eyes by going for a drive with my child and wife. Like, no one believes that, right? But like you see how like these people are actually really not all that intelligent compared to the way that they've been portrayed. And I think this is shining through with Morgan McSweeny the more that Keir Starmer's poll ratings begin to fall apart, and the more that we'll see the rise of reform. Maybe I'm just ranting, maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's a parallel there that's worth drawing attention to.
I think what's frustrating though as well, and I know obviously people have a big go at those who are on the left or on the hard left for, not letting go of Corbyn, just let him go. But I think again, what frustrates me is that, Morgan McSweeny started plotting pretty much immediately after Jeremy Corbyn was peaking in popularity, and even if he might disagree with his more left-leaning positions as opposed to whatever the hell Morgan McSweeny actually believes in, he could have used that power, used that coordination, used that organizing to help him win a future election. He got 40% in 2017 and ultimately ended up getting, I think it was about 32 in 2019 against Boris Johnson. Who knows what different circumstances we may have been in if all those people who were working in the background to get rid of Corbyn didn't actually work against him, but worked for him and worked for the party, party first, country first, as opposed to whatever the hell ideology that they believe in. It frustrates me that we could have been in different circumstances in many different ways. And, who knows? We may have, anything else could have happened. Who knows? But it is frustrating to know that people worked against him, which ultimately damaged the party, damaged the country in many ways. Boris Johnson may have still won in 2019. Who knows? He may have never got into power. Who knows? But ultimately, the actions that got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, which damaged the Labour Party to such a point that it got one of its worst results in decades upon decades, that gave Boris Johnson the power to go ahead and do everything that he did, right? Proroguing Parliament, everything that happened through COVID, all of these actions, again, can be linked in some way, potentially in some way, to the actions of the people who worked behind Jeremy Corbyn's back to get rid of him. It's frustrating that you can link it to almost anything. But again, this is me speculating. Who knows what impacts it had? But I think it's fair to say it had some impact in some way, and emboldening Boris Johnson to think, I've just won the biggest election in 100 years. I can do whatever the fuck I want. And part of that was done because Jeremy Corbyn lost so badly in 2019. But hey, who knows?
Yeah. I do think it's significant that Sue Gray particularly was the one who lost her position, because I don't know if you remember, but during the whole Partygate scandal, the big thing was that Sue Gray, in terms of her
Sue Gray report.
Yeah, she was the one who, like, the Conservatives and the Labour politicians were all turning to go, well, I trust the integrity of Sue Gray. Like, her integrity was sort of seen as unshakable. Now, since her son, there was that sort of thing with her son being like, I think he was involved in a little bit of corruption there. I think that there's been some.
What was that again? Was it a letter written to a college or something like that? What was that? Remind me again.
I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember. But the point is in a very mild way, I think since they've come to power, Sue Gray's integrity has been, like, shaken a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that she's been cast out, and Morgan McSweeny, who of course is absolutely covered in people who I would argue corrupt our politics in a way that is perfectly legal, but our system just allows for it, and they buy power and they buy their interests. Those people have been kind of brought in with Morgan McSweeny. So I do think it is this kind of the shifting out of the pretense that there was impartiality. I did want to talk about one comment in particular. I think that some of the comment section has been discussing this, and I'm actually really curious to hear what your thoughts are on it. If there is a leadership challenge, does anyone have any idea who might be throwing the gauntlet down, metaphorically speaking? That's from Jack Quillen.
Well, we all know that Wes Streeting is, every time I see Wes Streeting on TV, he looks like one of those dogs who are just like humping a teddy in the corner, and he just looks like an excited child with like a glimmer in his eyes. And when you look into his eyes, what it says is Prime Minister. I don't know why, but every time I see him talking, I see him thinking about how will this look in the future, because I feel like he's aware of how many things can be thrown back in your face, that every time he's answering a question, he's not even answering it for the present or the past, he's answering it for the future, because I think he's already got his eye on that seat. I really, really do. In terms of, this is where my expertise anyway comes down, in terms of who else is behind the scenes as a part of the power plays. Obviously, the people who put Keir Starmer in power would have a favourite. I don't know who that favourite would be. This is the type of stuff that Curtis and Helena would be really good at answering, more than myself. I have no idea at all. I wonder if anybody in the comments 100% Weasel Strecken. Yes, Simon. I'm so annoyed that Wes Street. I'm next to his constituency. He's is he North Ilford or South Ilford? North, I think, because I'm next to him in Woodford, and he almost lost by 500 votes to what was her name again? Was it Leanne Mohammed? I think her name was. She almost took out Wes Streeting by 500 votes. I would have been so happy that night when we were here at my flat filming a whatever it was 16-hour election coverage. If Wes Streeting would have been kicked out that night, that would have been beautiful. However, we didn't get it. I don't really know who else in the background is part of that power structure. I know I think Lisa Nandy's been involved in it before, but a lot of people don't like her. I really, really, really don't know. The inner workings of those Labour power structures is very much in the remit of Curtis and Helena. So I have got absolutely no idea who would be next in line. Definitely not Angela Rayner. Absolutely not. They'd get rid of her in a second if they could. She's like too lefty for them in any way. Rachel Reeves, Mark thinks maybe. I don't know. Rachel Reeves is very unpopular. I don't know what her latest polling is at, but she is incredibly unpopular right now. So I don't know if they'd even put her in place either. I honestly have no idea, which I think is also quite reflective of where we're at right now. I feel like in many ways in the past, when we've got a party that's together, I think we can I think I've got more confidence in saying who I'd rather have as the Tory leader than I do the next Labour leader, because I just don't know who's in that position to take it up. Wes? I'm just going to say Wes. He's my default number one. Not that I want him. That's the person who I think might get it. Who knows?
Yeah, it's our entire politics seems to be defined by what we don't want. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the politics via negativa. Like we kind of, because I feel like that's even the case for the Tories, right? That there's been people in the past 10 years who they would prefer to be the Labour leader and not prefer to be the Labour leader, but they're really split on who should be the Tory leader. And I think we find ourselves in the same position with the Labour Party. It's like neoliberalism and the politics we have just creates circumstances that just give us really shit options. Like the options just get worse and worse.
It's just frustrating, right? Because actually, tying back to McSweeny, what he's actually done is that there are as far as we can see, there are very few people in the future who could potentially be another ideal, more left-wing MP to want to be leader, right? Because they've cut off the heads of it. They've purged the left. They won't let anybody more in who's too left. You know, when they got rid of Faiza Shaheen in my constituency, I was kind of just looking at it and just thinking, she's not that left. She's just very much like kind of typical centre left. She pretty much fits in line with loads of people in the Labour Party who are currently there. And it scares me the fact that she got kicked out and prevented from running as MP. But she's just not that left. So those future voters that they're going to have to try and grasp, that they're going to have to try and court, how are they going to do that when they've just created a centrist party now? It makes no sense. It's short-term gains for long-term problems.
Yeah, I agree, especially as there's that sort of I call it I sometimes call it the dictatorship contradiction. The idea that when a dictator gains power, because they surround themselves by yes men, their ability to critique well just kind of falls apart because they're constantly having whatever idea they first happen to have reinforced without any critique. And I think this is bound to happen in the situation where you've got a tightening of kind of the authoritarian streaks in the Labour Party.
That same logic applies to that same logic applies to people like Elon Musk as well, like billionaires as well. Like if you look at the psyche of many people who are either rich, powerful, or successful, and they get all yes men around them, look what happens to them. Look what they turn into. But somebody in the comments, Mark, I don't think like Clive Lewis is soft left enough to have enough of a coalition. Isn't Clive Lewis the guy who refused to swear an oath to the king, I think, when he was getting sworn into the House of Parliament? Now, I don't give two fucks about the royal family, but I think that has burned any chance of him ever becoming leader of the party in the future, because there are still too many people who... What was that?
That might be someone else, because
Clive Lewis who did that.
It may have been, but bear in mind Clive Lewis also served in the army, so he would have had to swear to the Queen anyway.
Yeah, it was Clive Lewis.
Oh, it was
though,
Clive
yeah.
Lewis. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I think the fact he's been in the army probably offsets that a little bit as well.
Oh, I don't
He did
know.
tours
Can
of
you
Iraq.
imagine the Daily
so-
Mail headline of him running for the Labour leader, and
Yeah.
it's like he's the guy who refused to swear an oath of allegiance to the king?
That's probably
I
something to
just
that.
can't imagine he's ever going to be leader now after that.
Yeah, I think that there is probably something to that. But I also think Mark's saying that they want them to be leader rather than someone who has like a good chance of being leader. Like I would really love it if Zara Sultana would run to be leader and would win as well. But like I don't think it's likely.
We love Zara. I still think she's got years to go yet before she's in that position.
Just moving on to the like really important details. It was the Death Star exhaust port that I missed. Yeah, but deliberately put in by the architects. And yes, Rogue One is the best Star Wars film. I will not be taking any critique of this. You will be banned in the chat if you contradict this. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to ban people for that. But I would like to. Yeah. I wanted to draw attention to this one as well. Reform being second in just over 90 seats.
I still like, okay. Two factors. If Labour utterly, I don't like Labour. None of us like Labour in many ways. And the only thing that would make me vote Labour again under the current circumstances would be if Reform was potentially polling to win. That's the only thing that would make me vote Labour. However, if we talk about people who vote Reform, the vast majority of it is I'm voting for Nigel. And it's also a slight protest vote. If you look at, again, back in 2015 under UKIP, when they got, I think it was around 13 to 14% of the vote, they got like 3.8 million votes or something like that. And then you look at what Reform got in the last election, they only increased their vote share by like 300,000 to 400,000 voters. So 2015, that many people were like, I'm going to vote Nigel Farage. And he's only managed to bring over an extra few 100,000 voters in the space of 9 years. Unless Labour absolutely and utterly fail over the next 5 years to a point of complete and utter disaster, I really don't think Reform are going to be anywhere near ready to be at the point of winning in 2029, unless something absolutely drastic happens. What literally, regional war, which we are kind of on the edge of. Those type of things, massive economic depression. Hopefully, none of those things are around the corner. Because your analysis is right earlier, talk about people turning more right when there's an economic downturn, but hopefully that won't happen.
Yes. Well, this is the thing. I think we've got to be careful because Reform coming in second, it's not necessarily that they will win power, but that they will have the influence to be able to shape the policy of the parties that are more likely to get into power, whether that be Labour or the Conservatives, right? Because the Conservatives have an open strategy of just being like, well, will you stand your candidates down? That was what happened with David Cameron and the referendum, the Brexit referendum. Was he was like, okay, well, we'll stand our candidates down, and I think it happened again in 2017. They agreed to Reform's terms. They shifted to the right, and they agreed to stand their candidates down. Did I say 2017? I think I meant 2019. They agreed to stand their candidates down in order to make way for the Conservatives, and the Conservatives in turn adopted their policy. I think this is the danger with Reform. It's not the actual votes that they get. It's how they can weaponize those votes to turn our politics further and further to the right. Nigel Farage, of course, only recently became an MP, but he's had a massive impact on our politics for about the last 10 years or so, without even being an MP. It's that influence. The Reform have a ceiling. Yeah, I'd agree. Reform have a ceiling, but the problem is they can do a lot. If you've got control of the bottom floor of a building and you're a demolition expert, you can do a lot to influence the people in the flat above you make sure that they're paying their council tax, right?
I think what frustrates me about this whole conversation, and I was actually talking on a TikTok live the other day about this example, is that if you look at the people who, the biggest problem is obviously asylum seekers, people coming over on the boats. And then if you get into that conversation, we can talk about how a lot of those people are coming from countries which have been destabilized through war, a lot of it mostly connected to interventionist wars and conflicts, either fueled directly by the West or proxied by the West. Syria, Afghanistan, all of these issues. Obviously, some people come from other countries which we don't have those type of direct connections to, like Eritrea, which is a whole other conversation. But for those people who are seeking asylum connected to countries that we've disconnected, imagine the opportunity that is in front of Keir Starmer right now that could truly tackle reform. If he would turn around and say right now that we are trying to prevent a regional war in the Middle East, and if they actually really took this on and actually stood up to Israel, and allied with France, who are obviously, they're way more ardent on this issue than us, and took somebody like France and some other European powers to say enough is enough, and we're doing this with the motivation of, we know if a regional war breaks out, that is going to lead to more destabilization, more wars, more proxies. Those wars created ISIS, which created more destabilization, which led to things like Syria, millions of people being displaced, migrants coming to our country. And this is not the way I would take it, but this is how you could appeal to those voters, by saying, we want to stop a regional war to stop future people coming to this country. And that's how you kind of take on the idea of taking on reform, by saying we're not just tackling the boats. We want to stop the boats from ever wanting to set off in the first place by making that region be stable. But they're not. They're doing the opposite. Israel's right to defend itself has now led to what is basically about to be classed as a full-blown regional war. So they've done the opposite. Who knows? Maybe by the time all this blows over, we'll have more people coming over on boats because of the destabilization through Israel's right to defend itself, which may lead, for reform ceiling getting a little bit higher. Who knows? Was that a bit of a rant? Am I again connecting things that shouldn't be connected, or is that fair? Anyway,
that's right. I think that's right. I think the other question is, of course, the anti-migrant crowd. One group of people, you're right, who won't be happy with those wider regional war blowing up in that region, but also another group that won't be happy, apart from the humanitarians, is the people with investments in oil, because ultimately it would be really disruptive to a lot of their investments, because they'll have investments in Saudi Arabia and in Iran, and it's an interesting situation where you've got the two sides. Part of the discussions that are going on, without getting too much into tomorrow's show, part of the discussions that are going on at the moment are about protecting oil fields and making sure that they don't become a target, because there's something that Iran can obviously hit that would be damaging to Israel, and there's not a lot that that can be done to prevent a hit on oil facilities. And I think that's, it's something where you'd have thought, particularly given who funds the fossil fuel interests that fund reform and their anti-migrant rhetoric, you'd have thought they'd have put two and two together and go, well, actually, a regional war right now, that really might not be good for our interests. Let's maybe tone it down. But they haven't. We should probably go on to another. Did you highlighted another comment? I'll bring.
I was going to say, is this our Simon? I think it's our Simon. Simon in the comments, is this you?
Oh yeah.
I think it is.
Could well be.
Sorry, yes. It's a friend of ours. Just making sure. I want to make one more comment on that. Yeah, with the oil thing, it's very true. That what could happen now? Americans massively vote with their wallet. They've already blamed Biden for any increase in price of anything over the last 4 years. And now this spike in oil prices could very well, it's very possible, because it's one of the closest elections in modern American history, could very well lead to Trump getting into power, which will then lead to more destabilization. So we'll see. We will see.
Yes. And it's in the context of this protection of really unpopular policies in the Middle East that I want to talk about the ECHR, which is the other story that we wanted to talk about. So basically, Boris Johnson has written in the Daily Telegraph, he didn't actually write in the Daily Telegraph, he was interviewed in the Daily Telegraph, saying that he favoured a referendum on the European Convention on Human Rights, because he thinks that it doesn't uphold and doesn't protect your rights in any meaningful way. I've forgotten the exact quote from Boris Johnson. He said, "That's it. It doesn't provide people with the protections that they would otherwise have," and he's calling for a referendum on it. I think that there's a couple of things that are worth covering just to start with. So the ECHR, people always talk about the ECHR without kind of going into a little bit about what it is. So I just want to do that before we start. So the ECHR, when we're talking about the European Convention on Human Rights, that's abbreviated to ECHR. When you're talking about the European Court of Human Rights, you abbreviate it capital E, capital C, lowercase t, HR. So that's usually the way that. But this is also not to be confused with the EHRC. I don't think that the EHRC should have been allowed to be named the way it was. The EHRC is the Equality and Human Rights Commission. The one that was set up by, I think it was set up by the Conservatives, was very critical of Corbyn's Labour, and then it turned out that it was caught up in a whole bunch of transphobia and other issues where the people inside it were like, yeah, we don't really think that the people running this are interested in human rights or equality at all. Yeah, I know. The European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention of Human Rights were set up, of course, by the Council of Europe, the 9 or so countries that form the Council of Europe, and it now has around 30 or 40 members. And the basic principle of the Convention and the Court is for when your country has failed to uphold your human rights, they can be protected under this convention. The way it works is if I feel that my rights haven't been protected inside my own country and by the legal system of my own country, and I have exhausted all avenues, that's really important, within my country, I can make an application which will then be handed either to a single judge, usually if it's being rejected, a committee of 3 judges if it's a relatively simple case, or a chamber of 7 to 17 judges. And this will all depend upon the admissibility and complications of these cases. In the past 10 years before 2022, the UK only heard 8 cases. The ECHR only heard 8 UK cases which concerned expulsion or extradition, so any to do with immigration. And there's been a slight bump in recent years. So I think it's worth asking straight off the bat, why else might these politicians want to withdraw? Because clearly it's not having that much impact on immigration.
Oh, that question was directed at me. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was part of a continued rant about these.
No. You could, jump in.
Yeah, what frustrates me about this whole rhetoric is that you can very quickly Google and check how many people we deported last year. About 7,000 without any issues whatsoever. So they're not interfering in our deportations. The only time they do in any way, as Q pointed out, there's been very few cases that have actually made it to the ECHR which are anything related to deportations in any way. And guess what? Many of them are actually denied, but they don't make it onto the front page of the Daily Mail. People have tried. I think the last case, if I remember correctly, when I checked just a few days ago, I went onto the ECHR's website. It was a case where a Pakistani man tried to go to the ECHR because he was going to be deported. He applied and he got denied and he got deported. They've only ever interfered in they've only taken part. Interfered is the wrong word. They've only taken part in very few cases. And actually, most of the cases, they actually agree with the deportation. Very few people are saved by the ECHR. And it's very frustrating. On top of that, the ECHR also dictates that we can, I don't think the correct word is custody, but basically we can essentially put people into a place while they're waiting for their asylum application to go through. It is up to us, and somebody pointed this out in the comments, if we let them work or not. So if we've got, anything from over the last few years as low as 30,000 up to 70,000 applications for asylum in the UK, we've got over 1 million job vacancies. Some of these people are skilled. They can speak English absolutely fine, and they're ready to work. We know that people who come to this country and have emigrated here have a lower unemployment rate than people who are native to this country, which is the technical word used. I hate that word, though, native. Native to this country, native born, whatever. They claim less benefits than a person who is born in this country. These people are ready to work. They want to work. Let them work. If they want to come here and claim asylum and they want to work, let them. Then they can subsidize themselves while they're here, because they would want nothing more than to earn money for themselves, for their family, than live off of our state. And it's not because I wouldn't want to give them that money, because it's very little money that we actually give them when they're actually here waiting in a hotel for sometimes years at a time. They want to work. Let them do it. And it would get rid of this argument about how much we're spending on asylum applications and putting people in hotels. And it would also bring more taxpayers into the country. It would alleviate so many systems, which they are putting very small burdens on right now, but still a small burden, which could be alleviated. It is our own laws and our own systems which add this burden, which are actually nothing to do with the ECHR in any way. It's just another scapegoat. And I'd hope that if there is a position in 5 years where somehow a more right-wing coalition comes into power, that the UK public are still traumatized enough from Brexit to not vote to leave the ECHR, because it would be so damaging, so destabilizing in so many ways, let alone how it would affect things like the Good Friday Agreement. I don't know if you remember, I may be on a bit of a rant right now. Cog, you might be better at this side of history than me, but when Rishi Sunak was trying to negotiate that new agreement with the EU, with the Irish Border Sea, whatever it was called, we literally saw a new resurgence of the quote-unquote new IRA, just because the talks were going on, because they weren't happy that there might be a harder border. They literally came out, if I remember correctly, they killed a police officer, if I remember correctly, at his child's football event. And that was just in talks. Can we imagine what devastation we would throw this country into, and Ireland, by leaving the ECHR? That's just one secondary effect that the new IRA could revitalize. You know, we had the Troubles for how many decades, which killed, I think, around 4,000 people, police officers, military personnel, civilians, cars getting blown up in streets, hotels being bombed. And that's just one secondary effect of potentially leaving the ACHR, which should scare everybody to shit. And there are so many more secondary effects of what could happen if we leave the ECHR. That's just the one that immediately comes to mind as well.
Yeah, the Good Friday Agreement is the border stuff is quite interesting, because it's understanding the nature of the Irish border being both a hard and a soft border at the same time. Is one that's like a for political symbolism reasons is a hard border, but to protect the interests of both of a united Ireland is also a soft border. Is one that's, it's really important to understand that the movement across that border is part of what makes it work. And in order to have movement, you need to have alignment in terms of legality and litigation. You can't have too much separation, and of course, like you say, creating a situation where the UK was outside the European Convention on Human Rights and the Irish were in it, does immediately create problems. I did want to talk about just briefly some positive cases of the ECHR, because I think, again, I'm an advocate for the ECHR. Yeah. I want to put the case forward. I don't think we should be given a referendum on it, because I think it's too important. Two, our parliamentary system is not set up for referendums. Referendums are damaging in so many ways, because they are the vote of the dictator, right? They're the vote where you make a choice and you can't go back on it. And I think that is quite damaging, unless you have like periodical referenda every 5-10 years to see if you want to go back into the European Convention on Human Rights. But I think the Brexiteers will still be saying that you lost the 2016 referendum in 2050. That they're not going to be letting that one go. But I think some of the cases that spring to mind that people might be interested in are the Smith and Grady versus the UK case, which essentially protected LGBT people's right to serve in the military. Now, of course, we have a shortage of people in the military. We need as many people in the military as we can. Beneficial to Britain, like undoubtedly, right? You've got Awida versus the UK, where a group of Christians were protecting their religious, their freedom of religious expression at work. Something that I thought that like the UKIPers and the reform lot would have been well behind, right, protecting British
Was
values.
that the airline
protecting
case with the woman who wanted to wear the cross?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
we're thinking of the same ones because it was specifically about wearing a cross.
Yeah.
You've got Gillian and Quinton versus the UK, which was about the arbitrary use of stop and search powers to violate protesters' privacy. Now, if you didn't have those protections, by the way, I'm listing cases that have been won. If you didn't have those protections, how much easier would it be to intimidate pro-Palestine protesters? If you're in a situation where you don't like Keir Starmer, which is, I'm aware, the majority of the UK right now, it's not in your interest.
Sunak, apparently.
Yeah, it's like not in your interest to be leaving a court that will uphold your right to protest. Your right to protest, as much as you might want to poo-poo protesters for, I can't believe I just said that, as much as you might want to shit on protesters for upholding for holding up traffic or being a pain or being a nuisance or being too left-wing, you really should think, because you might be the people who need to be protesting in the next few years and months. Like, I know it's primarily a thing that the left do, but there are right-wing groups that protest, particularly like when we're talking about over changes to tax reform or fox hunting. There's various fox hunting groups that do a lot of protesting. Taxpayers Alliance rights and things like that. The other one that I think is really significant, particularly when we have an aging population and an aging voter base, is McDonald versus the UK, which was about inadequate care being provided for an elderly woman in a care home. She wasn't getting protection from the UK courts. She'd exhausted her protections in terms of the UK courts, so she had to go to the ECHR, and the ECHR said, "Yep, you can't do that. You have to provide better care for her," which I hope all of us would want going forward. So my understanding of it is basically that it just gets worse for everybody involved. Leaving the European Court of Human Rights, but also I tried to pick out cases when I was researching those cases that I would have thought that the right-wing elderly Christians who are interested in protesting Keir Starmer and care about the military would be interested in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what people don't realize, to boil it down really simply, is that every time the ECHR has ruled in the favor of a person over the government means that that government tried to breach your human rights. So every case that has ever gone forward to the ECHR and they've agreed with that person, that is the moment that the government tried to infringe on your rights. It's an example of why the court needs to exist. The only way I would ever leave the ECHR is if we went over to a higher, more protected constitutional system. I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, that's the reason we have to do it. That's the only compromise I would ever want to make. And it'd be like what somebody said just slightly earlier about, Double D, about referendums being 60%. I want constitutional reform. I'm fed up of being one of the only countries in the world that has like a uncodified constitution. Brexit should have never happened because fundamentally most countries accept that through their democratic system that a gust of wind on a particular issue can change people's minds on things and fundamentally damage them just because there's a 50-50 threshold. The way a country works should only be able to be changed, whether it's through whether it's something that's to do with like the voting systems, to do with the infrastructure of an entire country and how it functions, should only ever be able to pass a higher threshold. Most countries in the world do this. Like even in America, right? Not the greatest example. They're a mess. But you have to have 2/3 to change the constitution. I wouldn't vote for something that high. I think 60% is a nice number. But going back to someone mentioning as well, people having ballot initiatives, Jacqueline here, that's great because for other things, yeah, we can have a 50-50, right? If people wanted to, I don't know, legalize marijuana, 50-50, I'm happy with that. If people want to, ban fox hunting properly, 50-50 perhaps. But when it comes to the infrastructure of how an entire country functions, something that's going to fundamentally change everything in any way, and things that are directly related to human rights should be sealed away on a higher threshold other than 50%, because look where we are. A gust of the wind changed everything. And now we know a lot of those people are dead now who voted for Brexit, and a lot of those people have changed their minds. So we're stuck with this mess because of this lovely centrist government who will refuse to engage in any talks about ever joining even aspects of the European Union, never mind the European Union itself, even though it would help. But anyway,
I wanted to
rant over.
I wanted to just draw attention to the comment from Rachel, like, let the bodies pile high. Yeah, what would these people get away with if they could? But also the comment from Jacqueline again. Sorry to keep bringing your comments up, but not being cynical, but perhaps there are people who are hoping that the elderly are too cognitively declined or senile to notice what their standard of care is. And I actually think if the thing is, the Tories have got the elderly in a vice grip right now because they control their reading, right? The right wing control what they're reading. They control what, they go to their newspaper for the news, and it provides them a great big pile of shit about how immigrants are ruining the country, so they need to vote for the right wing parties, or they need to vote for parties that are anti-immigration. Meanwhile, all of the parties, whether it's the Tories failing the pensioners on under Liz Truss and protecting their pensions in terms of their economic plans, or whether it's the Tories just completely disregarding them with the "let the bodies pile high" comments. That's the elderly. That's who those are whose bodies were going to pile high because they were statistically the most vulnerable. And then you've got Labour introducing the winter fuel cap. Somebody does need to stick up for the elderly, and I'd rather it wasn't the Reform Party that took on those votes. And I think we need to.
I'm going to be controversial because I do very much take the side of. There are a lot of pensioners who are doing just fine. I believe in the means testing, which I don't think is actually quite unpopular, especially with a lot of people on the left. We accept that means testing is absolutely fine for the winter fuel payments. Obviously, there's an argument about where the threshold should be. I think that's very fair. But a lot of pensioners are just fine. And if you actually look at people who are retired and how the percentage of those people who own their home and the average pension income that they have, they're doing fine compared to many other groups of people. There's constant appeal to pensioners, not only because they're retired, they're not really, many of them, most of them aren't actually paying any tax anymore because obviously they live just around that threshold. Usually, if it's like a two-person household, they usually live around that, bringing in about £12,000 a year each kind of threshold when you include their private pensions, when you include their, not the government pensions. What's the correct word I'm looking for? Not called government pension, it's called...
the public sector pension.
Whatever it's called. There are other groups of people out there who need more help now. And I'm sorry that we have to cater to pensioners because they're the biggest voter group, but many of them are fine. And a lot of these pensioners have now dragged this country through the bush by keeping the Tories in power, by voting for Brexit. And I'm sorry, and many of them have ruined this country. Many of them are voting against their best intentions because the workforce that we need to bring into this country, as somebody brought up in the comments, are carers. We can't train enough of them. People don't want to do that work, and we need to bring them over here. But those people want to vote against those people coming over here. They've lowered the amount of people who can come here and work through the systems that they've created and that they voted for. While they sit, a majority of pensioners sit in their house that's been paid off for years, and they continue to vote against their best interests. And it's absolutely frustrating. And I'm fed up of everyone having such emotive feelings towards those groups of pensioners. Now, side note, there is a group of pensioners out there who are not as privileged as those other pensioners, and they do need help, and they are getting it. They're keeping their winter fuel payments. I would argue that the threshold should be slightly higher because when it comes to those thresholds, we're not taking that much into certain regional aspects as well. When growing up in Leeds, the cost of a house in Leeds versus Bradford, just a few miles away, can be, starkly different. The rent can be twice as high in Leeds as it would be in Bradford, but the benefits that you would get off the government are the same, which is unfair. And we should help those people who need the extra help. But there are other groups of people in this country who are now suffering and will suffer more in the future because of the current circumstances than pensioners are suffering now. And I'm fed up of having to appeal to them, and I'm not sorry for it.
Well, I've got a bit of sympathy with the idea that we shouldn't be appealing to pensioners, but I think we really should be protecting them. I don't think you really disagree with that idea, to be honest. But I think that the problem with the means test is for one thing, it's more expensive than just taxing. We already have a system for targeting the richest in our society. It's taxation. Like we already have a system that could actually target the very richest. The problem is, like, a lot of the pensioners don't know they can claim pension credit. The form is massively long. A lot of pensioners are fallen behind in the technology gap, and it's true that 25% of pensioners are millionaires, but that's in asset wealth, right? Which is really hard to translate into liquid wealth. It can't be very easily.
Maybe they should downgrade.
Well, the thing is like a lot of, there's an argument for them downgrading, but then after they've downgraded, what do? Because like once that wealth is gone, and in terms of like the care that is required by somebody, and once they've made their assets liquid, the amount that the state can impose taxes on them, and can argue, well, you pay above a certain threshold for this care home because you earn above a certain threshold. We're not going to protect you. You have hundreds of thousands of pounds in the bank because you've liquidized your house, your assets. So we're not going to protect you. You frankly, you can keep paying out. So a lot of pensioners, of course, are stubborn, as you would be. They want to maintain their autonomy. It's something that's really important in terms of gerontology, the study of aging and keeping people comfort in old age. It is really important that people like maintain their autonomy. It's important that we make sure that it's targeted. And I do think that although people have been appealing to pensioners, they've been appealing to what the right-wing media have told pensioners their interests are, which is appealing to the anti-migrant rhetoric, because no one's too smart to fall for propaganda. That's never true, right? No one. If all you're being given in terms of information is immigrants are the problem, you're going to think that immigrants are the problem. You're going to vote in a way that reflects that. The problems come when you've actually got real interests that need to be looked out for, like heating your homes in the winter, like making sure that you retain your autonomy, like the costs of care. And when you've like been told to ignore all of those things in terms of immigration, somebody has to step in, and the Tories aren't going to do it. Labour clearly aren't going to do it. Do Reform step in and do it? I don't think so. I don't think Reform care enough. I think they're too interested in looking after the fossil fuel industry, who of course massively benefit from non-insulated homes. So I do think we need somebody like a portion of the left that will take a gerontological approach, that will take an approach that analyzes the conditions for elderly people and makes an appeal to them, but in a way that actually benefits them, rather than just like, oh, you're anti-immigration. Okay, well, we will bash migrants even harder than the Conservatives will. And it's like, that's not actually helping pensioners. So like I agree with your frustrations, but like it's like just coming at them from a slightly different angle, I guess.
No, I was just laughing at this comment. Gen X gave the world 80s music and Thatcherism. What's not to like about never-ending neoliberal hell? I think I accept that people can fall for propaganda, and anybody can fall for it regardless of levels of intelligence or background, but there is still a level of personal responsibility that people need to take on. And I feel like we've got a group of people who have seen perhaps their standard of living decline and have fallen for that propaganda, but are ultimately voting against their best interest. And I don't know how to fix that. But I think one method, perhaps, just maybe, could be people taking on the positive immigration conversation, right? Just a little bit better. But no one's willing to do it because they're so scared of having that conversation about saying how good it is, the benefits that it brings to the country, which, by the way, is tens and tens and tens of billions of pounds to our country every year. We're actually subsidized our NHS is subsidized by migrants right now, because every time a migrant comes over, we're not talking about the boats, we're talking about the people who come over on visas, they have to pay a surcharge fee to the NHS. And all the data shows is that they almost never use the NHS, those people, especially in the first few years of being here, where they have to keep renewing that surcharge. So they're actually subsidizing our NHS care because they don't use it. There's so many benefits to bringing people over, increasing the tax burden. Spreading out the tax burden. So many good reasons to bring people over, but no one's willing to have that conversation. We know, I'm pretty sure, that there is still no evidence of any Western countries who've been able to increase their population size. Reverse the trend that's currently happening in regards to people having babies, which I still think is a shit conversation anyway, because by having these conversations, we are still playing into that capitalist system of never-ending growth. We have to increase the population. We have to do this because it's the way every system works. And who's going to take care of the old people, and how's the economy going to grow? And that's, again, a big part of the problem that we need to tackle. We have to play into the system of, we need more people. And if not, we need more people having babies. But ultimately, it's all because we need to keep the system going. The never-ending system of growth, which is eventually, going to get to a point where it's just going to collapse, ultimately. At some point, it has to, right? Like, we can't just keep going. But we're all a victim to it anyway. But, yeah. That's a whole other rant that I could go on for a very long time for. I just want to say a big thank you to my pal Fur. Maybe we should look to appealing to those who are politically disenfranchised and the elderly or the Tory voters. Core Guidance ranted for a few minutes. I'll let you have that one.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with that at all. Totally agree. I think that there are so many groups that we need to appeal to along the lines of the idea that they are vulnerable. I just think the way that, say, the LGBT community, the way that young people, the way that the Black community in the UK, the way that the Muslim community in the UK, the way that these people are vulnerable is different to the way that elderly people are vulnerable, but elderly people are still a vulnerable group. And we should be careful about dismissing their interests and rights, given that we're a population that's going to be, because of our kind of lopsided population tree, we're going to be one day in that demographic where we're going to be relying on a smaller number of young people statistically to give us care or to care for our parents. And frankly, we should make sure that we're protecting those people. That's all I'm saying. Do make even if they don't vote for you, just make an appeal to protect those people, because you're not necessarily looking to have them vote for you. If you can, that's great. But it's more about just protecting them as humans than necessarily appealing to their vote. I don't want Lewis's the system is doomed to be the thing we end on, because I don't want it to be that doomed.
No, I just want to make one point about the comment that's highlighted right now, is that Labour have lost their chance to either get back the left or activate more people on the left. One plan that they have is to auto-enroll voters, which, in theory could help them in the future. However, I think after the damage that they've done with Palestine, the damage that they've done with purging the left, the damage that they've done with the child benefit cap, who knows what austerity is coming with the budget, which is when again, Cog? Sorry, end of October?
30th, isn't it? 30th?
Yeah. I don't know what groups they could access that they haven't either pissed off or wouldn't be able to get to, because they've already disenfranchised massive parts of the left. And are they going to go for the disenfranchised center? Is that even a thing? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who they could go after.
Yeah. I'm
talking about Labour, but obviously the comment was about who we should be appealing to. But I'm just using it as in essence of Labour, because we don't really stand behind any particular party here at Turn Left. I think if there was an election right now, I don't know who we'd all vote for. I really don't know.
I'm so glad that the Cal isn't here, because Cal would immediately be going, "No, we stand behind the Greens." And somebody, by the way, if you didn't know, Cal is a Green voter. Cal's a Green member, actually.
Wait, Callum votes Green.
I know, it's so unexpected. It's like seeing me at a barbecue. It just never happens. It's been a bit of turn left. So like the first few times that we tried to organize streams, for those who don't want to know a bit of the behind the scenes stuff, I kept going, no, I can't do that. I've got a barbecue that weekend. So the running joke
You've always
became
had a
behind the
barbecue
scenes.
to go
Yeah, I've
to.
always got a barbecue that I'm running. So I'm setting up, for some Christmas time barbecues to keep the trend going. And Callum's thing was always, he's a Green Party member, and he brings that up every 30 seconds. So that's the some of the running jokes behind the scenes. We should probably wrap up the stream. We went on for a lot longer than I thought we were going to. I thought we were only going to do an hour. But honestly, those two stories, we had a lot to say about them. I was worried we weren't going to have enough, but I think we did pretty well on that. And of course, we couldn't have done it without our fantastic commenters. We really appreciate you. Just commenting or just engaging in any way is a contribution in itself. But if you do want to make a financial contribution, bear in mind that you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/turnleftmedia, or our website. What's the website address? turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. Lewis brought it up. I've forgotten that we had a little banner that we could put up. Yep, that's the address you should go to. Or indeed, you can download some of our videos and you can share them, make a little remix. It will be fun. It's good fun. It shares our content. It's a fun way that you can engage with us. It's cool stuff. You can take the piss out of us. I don't really care. In fact, it'll be a laugh. But yeah, Lewis, was there anything you wanted to end on particularly?
Yeah, obviously, tomorrow's the anniversary of October 7th. COG, as he said earlier, will be doing an episode tomorrow, which is focusing around that. I know we talk a lot about hating our MPs and hating our elected officials in many ways, depending on obviously where you're located. Please continue to contact them on these issues and any other issue that you care about. The pressure does help, and it will continue. The battle for things like South African apartheid being ended took years and years of pressure. We have to keep the pressure up. So please, please, please contact your elected officials, especially how things are escalating in the Middle East. And again, on any other issue that you care about, please, please reach out to them. My MP is Ian Duncan Smith, and I don't like emailing him, but I do, and I still have to, because you still got to apply that pressure, even if he was the former head of the Friends of Israel. I will still keep emailing him every week. But that's my final message. So I hope everybody has a good evening.
That's a rough person to have to email, I've got to say. But yes, I'll do the outro bit. Thanks for watching. We will be back next Sunday at the same time of 7:30 p.m. And in the meantime, make sure you do tune into the regular Normal Island live shows that will be happening every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They'll also be at 7:30 p.m. Apart from that, thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.